We've had a fantastic time so far at this conference to be able to really dive into a variety of aspects of farm to school. And we know that one of those aspects is also the families that are supporting our schools, that are supporting the kids in our programs, and supporting the agriculture that's happening in the community. So today we want to talk a little bit more about how do we engage those families and see where that might lead us for some new ideas, or hear as well about some of your ideas. See if I can change my slides. There we go. Technology, we got it figured out mostly. So my name is Brianna Routh. Again, I am the food and family specialist with Extension for Montana State University. So I have service around the state and get to work with a lot of fantastic people, some of which are here today. And I'm also an assistant professor at MSU in nutrition and community health. And so because of that, I am going to talk to you guys a little bit about what does the research tell us. But I'm going to start back, thinking back probably to school days, talk a little bit about theory. Why do we do the things that we do? One of those things we talk about is what are these different levels of influence? So when you think about kids, a lot of our goals around farm to school are to engage them in local foods, to understand that process of how we get food from the farm to their plate, as well as trying to help and promote some of those healthy nutrition behaviors too. So how do we actually make that change? A lot of times this is going to be a change, or we wouldn't be doing this in the first place. So one of our avenues is working directly with those kids, whether that's doing taste tests or incorporating it into their meals, and bringing it into the classroom, getting them hands-on in the garden, on the farm. That's really direct engagement with that child to help improve their knowledge, to help improve their behaviors and attitudes. But there's actually a whole bunch more that goes into why kids do the things that they do, and maybe why they do that throughout their life. So here I've listed a couple of these broad influences. We have things like home and school and community. So now I'm going to turn it back to you guys to do a little bit of brainstorming too. What are some of these factors that might be at play in the home or in the school or in the community that can either help support some of these behaviors we're trying to promote around farm to school, or maybe cause some challenges? Throw out any ideas.
Peer pressure.
Peer pressure, yep. So whether that's kid peer pressure, sometimes that can have a positive influence. Sometimes maybe they're yucking your yum, and that might be a little bit of negative influence. Great. What else?
Access in the community?
Yeah, what is even available in that community? And that can involve a whole bunch of different variety of things, whether that's maybe the distance that something has to travel to get to the community. That could involve what's the structures in the community that are in place to be able to, say, sell that product in the community. Great. Maybe two more ideas of what some of those influences are. Income. Yeah, so that income is maybe going to affect the home, what's happening in the home, what's available in the home. It might also impact the school itself in terms of what that funding looks like in that community to support the school, to support maybe the PTA or some of these other organizations that help in getting farm to school going. Great. And one more?
I would also say, like, going along the side of income would be like family opinion or family belief.
Yes.
A lot of, we can do it on our own, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of, we don't take charity, things like that.
Exactly. And so that's, you talk about family belief, that also goes beyond that into the community. What are those community norms, beliefs, practices? How are they talking about these things in the community? What's that maybe priority area, or what do those challenges look like as well? Again, a lot of these factors can be either a support if they're really going in your favor, or they can be a challenge. And so as we look at these different levels, we talked about those norms, what's that messaging that's going around in the community. Sometimes that's even broader, like what's going around on social media, for example. We also talked about access and economics, and that really can have that community-wide impact on How successful could something like Farm to School be in your community? We also see in the schools, you talk about peer interactions. I would also say a lot of these school professionals, some of you are here today. Can you raise your hand if you work in the school in some way? Okay, all right. So all of you are that school interaction with those kids, whether that's in the cafeteria, in the classroom, at recess, maybe an administrator that's supporting these activities. Those direct and indirect interactions can influence what that child might do. You also have things like the institutional environment and access. So those things are kind of along the lines of those norms and messaging, but really at that institutional level. So what's happening in the school? What does that support look like? How widespread or maybe how unique is that support as well? And then we get to what we're really talking about today, which is the home. And this is one of those aspects that, from my perspective, and in a lot of the research that I look at, is really one of these areas that is sometimes hard to engage in when you're thinking about, okay, I'm a school professional, I work with families, but how do I really have that engagement? Maybe it's easiest in a school system to really have that direct engagement with the kids because they're in your classroom, they're in that environment with you, and that's really where your interaction is happening. So, but at the home, there's a whole bunch more that's happening. There's those family interactions. So a lot of times we think about maybe that's the primary caregiver who's making the foods and then feeding them, giving them to that child. That's a really clear interaction where Farm to School might come into play if you're trying to say, promote trying this local zucchini at home. You need to have someone who is also your support system in that home to encourage help that to happen. It also comes into play in a variety of other family interactions, whether that is things like who else is going shopping at the store? Are there any other siblings or any other household members that might be, for example, yucking your yum or encouraging you to try some sort of local food for a snack, for example. And then another aspect that comes in as well, where you really see family having an influence, is when it comes to food parenting. And so I'll talk a little bit more about what exactly is food parenting, but you can kind of take the two words and put them together and get a pretty good idea of what I'm talking about. In terms of what does that parent-child, caregiver-child interaction look like around food? What are those discussions happening? Is it something where the caregiver provides food and the child decides what they're going to eat, when they're going to eat, how they're going to eat it? Or is it something that has more at play like reward and restriction? You have to eat your broccoli or you don't get ice cream for dinner. A variety of those things. And all of those parenting strategies are valid, but we do know from some research that some can be more successful in really promoting some of those behaviors or some of those healthy food practices that we might be trying to engage families in when we're thinking about Farm to School. And then we also talked about the child. Again, this comes back to, there's some things that we can change, things that we can address like knowledge, attitude, some of those behaviors or skills that the child might have that they could then take to the home or use in the school environment or bring back to their community. But there's also some things that we just can't control, things like different risk factors that could be demographics or genetics, adverse experiences that they may have had earlier in life. Some of those things are beyond our control at a present date. Sometimes you can go back and try to address or help or reduce risk factors. But all of these things are at play. When we're talking about how do we engage kids in Farm to School, we have to consider how all of these different levels might be either supporting or making it more difficult for them to really engage in these behaviors. So we talked a little bit about it, but I want to get back to why should families be something that you're considering in your Farm to School effort. Now, I will first start by saying, don't worry, I'm not trying to suggest that you have to do it all. We'll talk about how this could potentially happen as a partnership, as a team effort. But really, why should we be thinking about families as a part of this effort? So there's a growing body of research that says our caregivers, when they have that awareness, they can actually support or improve program capacity for Farm to School. So parents, when they are on board, they can be your best advocate. They can help to make Farm to School successful. They can bring new resources. they can bring new engagement, they can bring new ideas. We also know from research that in general, those household practices, I talked a little bit around food parenting, for example, but those household food and physical activity practices, what's happening outside of school has really, has large impacts on the health risk factors. So that, whether that's risk factors or benefits, things like engaging in healthier food practices, those are really supported in the home. You spend, a child spends a great portion of their day in the school environment. That other portion of the day is often in a home or family interaction environment. So these two environments have to be working in tandem to be able to support those healthy behaviors we're looking for. And then again, I'm going back to theory, so forgive me for pulling this little nugget out, but again, this is not maybe outside of what you're already thinking. Our lives are linked. We have direct impact on those that we live with, and they have an impact on us. Whether, again, that's a parent and child, or it might also be a sibling, a grandparent that lives at home. It might be someone that's staying at the home for a short period of time. Any of those interactions that are happening in the home, research suggests that really we are dependent on one another for the things that we do, the ways that we do them, and maybe the supports or challenges that we're going to face in that environment. We know that children have some direct influences on purchasing. This can sometimes, again, be a benefit if the child is saying, hey, I had these kale chips at school, I really want to try them at home. That can sometimes influence the purchasing decisions. On the flip side, oftentimes we find children, maybe not surprisingly, are more a driving factor in purchasing of those more processed foods as well. And that's, again, a parenting challenge, a caregiver challenge that one has to figure out how they're going to navigate too. We do know as well that family members can influence and support children's food habits though. So when we find that when parents have a higher awareness of maybe what are those local foods, why should they be having them, what are those health benefits, they are actually more likely to be less influenced to be pushed towards those higher processed foods and more likely to engage in healthier food practices. So sometimes, again, those relationships are linked. It's not always a positive, it's not always a negative, but they are interacting, especially when it comes to the foods that are brought into the home and how those foods are consumed. So we know that as well, one of the interesting studies that I like to talk about, it's kind of an old study, but it was looking at different household members. A lot of times we look at maybe a mother or a female as this gatekeeper to a lot of food practices in homes. That is the case in many homes, not the case in every home, but this study also looked at fathers in the home, and they found that when a father, they weren't necessarily that purchaser, they weren't necessarily the person that was preparing the foods, but if that father was more accepting of these new foods, was maybe the one introducing or bringing them into the home, then the children were more likely to engage and take part in that new food and trying something new, trying something different than if the mother was to introduce it, for example. So we can't just think about one caregiver as that one go-to person, we gotta get them on board. Yes, we might have to get them on board, but thinking about family as a whole unit, recognizing that all of these households potentially look different and have different maybe strategies of engagement, ways of interacting, and benefits that they're bringing to the table to be able to support this, helps to think again, maybe about some different strategies for how we engage families and can create those supports or build on those supports that might already be present. So now I'm going to turn it back to you guys to see, has anyone ever engaged families in your program? Zoey, I'm going to have you hold on for a minute before talking about yours, but what strategies has anyone tried? Little, big, whatever the strategy might be, and did you have any successes or challenges? Or maybe you've thought about engaging families, but have had some maybe challenges or roadblocks along the way. Tell me some of those strategies. Yeah, Jason.
We used to do family food events in our school gardens.
Okay.
One per garden per summer. The thing were great when people showed up.
Yep.
But it was so weather dependent and like, you know, it was a ton of work on our end to do it, and then we didn't want to charge because we wanted to be available to everybody. But then we didn't charge and people would easily bill it off. So some years it was great at some schools, and then other years we put all this work in and like 2 people show up. So we kind of put them on hold a little bit.
Yep.
Because of these challenges.
Yeah, exactly. And families are, I don't know if anyone has children at home, but it's a busy thing to try to get all of the moving parts into place to go to these kinds of things too. But then on the part of the organization, that's a lot of time and effort that you've invested, and that's a lot of kind of planning and unknown that goes into it. Yeah. What else? Anybody else have strategies you've tried or thought about?
I could throw it.
Yeah, throw out another one.
We also do adopt a garden
Okay.
in the summertime for our garden, so we try to get families to sign up before the school year is over to take care of the garden for a week throughout the summer. And that one's actually been really effective in the schools.
Okay.
It was a really cool way to get folks in there when they don't really necessarily want to be at the school, and we kind of lure them in with do a little bit of work, take some veggies home.
Fantastic. That gets a little bit of that engagement, maybe a set time frame, so it seems a little more manageable, but really getting that hands-on interaction. Can I check if we have any comments from the chat too?
Don't yet. Anyone online have any thoughts?
Yeah.
I can share. So I work with Montana Teen Nutrition, and we try to do a lot of scratch cooking promotion in school nutrition.
Yeah.
And for us, I think the hardest thing is just like getting, or for school nutrition in general, is getting families to be open to even trying like school lunch and trying the food that's in the cafeteria. Because sometimes there's a perception that it's just not what they want, or what they have a lot of ideas of what it is. And so obviously during COVID, it was hard to get people to do a lot of the best practices like school lunch committees, or like getting parents to come in and eat food and that sort of thing. So I guess just connecting the school lunch piece with families' perceptions can be difficult.
And I didn't talk about this, we'll get to you in just a moment, but I didn't talk about this, that in addition to like parents being that promoter of farm to school, literally sometimes they are your funder to be able to encourage their kids to participate or have the funds, the resources to participate in school lunch, to engage in an after school activity. So parents, it can make or break whether your program is happening. Yeah, great.
In Big Fork, we did a Bring Your Parents to Lunch day, and it was actually far too successful. It was a very stressful day, but it was really, really beneficial because the kids were so excited to bring their parents to school, and we did an almost entirely Montana-made meal, which also, obviously every meal was not like that, but the school did purchase locally, and it was this way to really directly show families that this is what's happening in a lunch program. And when you send things home, you just have no idea if they're connecting. It was a really special, and we did taste tests during it, so people could like put stickers and say what they thought about the recipes, and yeah, that was a super successful and overwhelming.
Yeah.
One thought I had over time I've done with not in food but school related things is capturing parents when they're already there. So finding out dates of parent teacher conferences or of art nights or of when the school play is, events where people are already naturally going to be in building, and partnering with those teachers ahead of time to say, hey, we're going to be there. We want 5 minutes of their time. Or if it's a parent teacher day where they're going to filter, you know that your day is going to be spent in that hallway all day chatting with those parents as they filter in and out. But if they're already in building and it's not because of you, you can take advantage of that time in a positive way. So that's something that we've used in the past to like check in our information too.
Yeah, the captive audience. It works for kids, also works for their caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
We do that for kindergarten roundup too.
Yeah.
Schools, which is a great way to get them immediately.
Right.
Before they're even parents' first time at school.
Yeah.
The kids' first time, so that's, I think, a good way to.
And talk about a positive connection to the community that they're seeing immediately there too. I saw a couple chat, the numbers I think went up, is anybody right?
Not, yeah,
okay.
I think we're good.
All right, cool. Yeah, so you can, these are some really great strategies that you guys have already been trying. So keep these in mind, and also maybe we'll have some opportunity to talk a little bit more, hear from you guys in terms of your successes and challenges too. So in addition to those, I did some looking to see what kinds of ways other farm to school, school garden types of programs are trying to engage families. And so you talked a little bit about this, trying to raise awareness with the students, taking information home to families kind of indirectly. So they've learned about it in school, they've learned about it in their club, and then hopefully they'll take it home and talk to their parents about it and say, hey, I want those kale chips. That's one strategy. We also know that a lot of programs try strategies like sending resources home, whether that's something like a flyer, a handout, it could be some additional supplies, books, for example, that might go home as, say, here's an activity that you can do at home. We also have strategies, things like inviting other family members to come to a garden or sending gardening home. I know that was definitely happening a lot more during COVID to be able to still engage kids in that gardening aspect. There's also a variety of schools that are doing things like picking up some of the local harvest. It is things that kids help to grow. There's even some schools that maybe have something like a CSA, community supported agriculture, that then they would have caregivers pick up a pack every week or every month in alignment with whatever that local product was they were talking about. Having that partnership too in the parent-teacher association, again, seeing how you can galvanize those caregivers and their support to help build the program, to help support that at all levels too. And then family cooking, I will talk more about what those possibilities might look like as well. But as you can see here, really the ideas for programming, and this is not all of the ideas. There's not a lot of research out there right now around what is the most effective strategy. We do know that a lot of programs are trying to engage parents, trying to engage caregivers in some way, but that takes a lot of time and resources and effort. And so that can really be a challenge to maybe put all of your eggs in the basket of engaging families if that's not your primary focus. So again, there's kind of all variety of these ways of engagement, but it also means there's a world of possibilities for how else we can keep having that interaction and engagement with families. And so I'm pulling out another that tool that I like to use as well. This is called the spectrum of prevention. And this gets at ways that you might be able to make an influence, that you might be able to make an impact on some of those different levels that we talked about at the beginning, in terms of saying, yes, we want to educate our kids, we want to share that knowledge, share the skills, get them hands-on in the garden, hands-on cooking, hands-on taste testing. But also, what are some of these other things we can do? Some of the things are things like community engagement and engaging more community members. So it's farm to community as opposed to farm to school. We also have things like educating providers. So the providers in this case might be the classroom teachers, it might be the administrators, it might be the school lunch professionals. It could be basically anybody that's here today or at this conference. When we engage in conversations like this, we're building that skill set and broadening that reach of our impact as well. There's also this level of impact, just simply engaging in that conversation in something like a coalition, a network, where then you have a joint group of people that are working together. You might have different goals, but you have this common overarching mission of really supporting that farm to school movement. And then you can have more people, more resources to be able to achieve that when you have different organizations, different individuals with some of those different priorities that can then support and broaden your reach. We also have things like organizational practices. It might be things like the school wellness policy. What can be done there with maybe the support of those parents that are engaged to make it easier to have farm to school, to have these local products brought into the classroom, brought into the lunchroom, or even shared back with the home. And then we can get also to things like policy and legislation. This seems big, seems broad, but it can also happen really at a local level, whether that's talking to your county commissioners about how they can support something like this. It could be bringing something to the state, like we had the farm to school bill that came up as well. And so all of these different levels are areas where you could be making impact, could be making connection with families to also support that this local food production, this local food into the schools, as well as local food into the home, can be that easy choice for the families in your community. That is really what I see as the ultimate goal, that we want to make it that easy choice, that no-brainer choice, to have local foods on your dinner table, to have local foods in your class, in your lunch, to understand where your food comes from. So again, a lot of the areas that we just talked about can get pretty broad and are probably in some ways beyond the scope of what you might be doing on a day-to-day basis. So that means we need to call in all of our partners. And before I share the list of partner ideas that I have, I want to hear from you guys. Who in your communities, who in the state might you engage to help you in supporting and connecting with families in your farm to school efforts?
My program has educators across the state that are working with low-income families.
What's your program?
Buy, Eat, Live Better program, your MSU extension. There's educators in Missoula who have to specifically find families to work with. And we have a really hard time getting people to our cooking and nutrition classes, so I feel like that might be an easy entry point. There's no one at Bozeman, but there's lots of people.
Yeah, so things like Buy, Eat, Live Better, the SNAP education program, extension as a whole can really be that support of a group that's already trying to reach families and reach the community. Great.
We're a nonprofit, and the school district is often our best partner. Like communicating through the school district channels is always so much more successful than any other method that we can try.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to the idea of reaching parents where they're at. If you can get into those communication systems that parents are already regularly looking at, know that they should be, here's where I'm gonna find information. If you can be that information, that's a great entry point. Who else? What else?
Kind of along those lines, the PTA is
Yeah.
absolutely essential part of the community.
Yeah. Those people that are already engaged at the table, having these conversations, if you can share that as a conversation point, or even bring to them, hey, we really want to engage families, help us figure out how to do that. Sometimes it doesn't have to be on you, sometimes it's just telling people, here's the challenge we're facing. So first of all, we have the schools and the kids. Sometimes they can be our best resource for coming up with ideas, even when we're struggling. So ask the kids, what's going to work in your home? How will you help your parents? How will you help your siblings to engage in more local foods? We have extension across the state. We also have things like volunteer organizations, those local Lions clubs, or a church organization, the parent-teacher associations that might be working in your schools. There's also a whole growing number of local food coalitions, food sovereignty groups, kind of these grassroots efforts. Many of you, I'm sure, are part of those and connected to them, but they can really be another avenue for helping to see who has the skills, who already has family, parent, community engagement in their mission that can be that support. The producers, see what ideas are already out there. The producers often are members of families. My favorite thing to say around the work that I do is that everybody has family and everybody eats food. So that's always a connection point. If you can talk to the producers, how should we engage families in your work? You are the expert in growing foods. How do you think that we should be engaging families? The Chamber of Commerce. Sometimes it's somebody that's entirely unrelated to, what I might stereotypically think about for food or family engagement. Maybe it's the business side of the community development folks that can really bring those new ideas or creative solutions to engaging families. And along those lines, I just made a really broad category here of anything that might be food, agriculture, community development related, nonprofits, coalitions, organizations. They might be great partners in this family engagement. And then any other ideas that maybe this list has sparked for you as well? So we're not trying to do this alone. We want to engage families, hopefully give you a little bit more inspiration as to why that could really be an impactful and beneficial component of your farm to school efforts. Families can be that greatest resource, that asset, that support, and they can also help for the long term, for the sustainability of your program, to be that funding source in the future, to be those boots on the ground, those volunteers. We can engage families in volunteering together. Although many are busy, when they do make the commitment, it can really have great impacts. They can be that support for that long-term behavior change for kids. When they're gone from your classroom, when they're gone from this school cafeteria, when they move on to the next, what are they going to take with them? The family is going to be the ones that can help